At the 1990 World Cup, France were not present as they failed to qualify, finishing behind Yugoslavia and Scotland. At the 1994 World Cup, France were not present as they failed to qualify, finishing behind Sweden and Bulgaria. At the 1998 World Cup, France were present as they were the hosts and went on to win the trophy, beating Brazil in the final. But how did they turn it around? How did they go from perennial failures to champions of the world in just under a decade? And what measures introduced were paramount to setting France on the course to becoming international powerhouses? Ladies and gentlemen, join me as we delve back through the archives once more to walk the winding road that led France to their first World Cup title. Our story begins in 1988, shortly after the 88 European Championships. The brilliance of Van Basten was forged in football history and the Dutch took home their first and only tournament crown. The French, who were the holders of the competition beforehand, were not there, having failed to qualify for the tournament, only amassing one win in their 8 qualifying matches. After a golden period for French football that saw them reach the semi-finals of the 1982 and 1986 World Cup and winning Euro 84 in between, it had all come crashing down shortly after. The French Football Federation were not oblivious to the underperformance being displayed by their national team as they set out a broad, ambitious strategy to improve player development with the establishment of the Clairefontaine National Football Institution. The results of this would not be felt until years later, so we'll pop a pin in that for now and come back to it later. In the meantime, France set about improving their fortunes by changing their manager. Out went Henri Michel and in came Michel Platini, the man who had carried France to their Euro 84 crown, who was now starting his managerial career. His ethos was to implement a better brand of football that focused on technique and flair as he had displayed in his playing days. Alongside this was a concerted effort to modernise and rejuvenate the team through the introduction of young talent into the fray. However, at the time of being appointed, France had already begun their qualification journey for the 1990 World Cup, having made a poor start which saw them draw 1-1 with Cyprus and lose to Yugoslavia. The attempts by Platini to juggle renewal of his side whilst also delivering results simultaneously were not fruitful, as the new man in charge failed to win any of his first 3 qualifying matches. And despite ending with back-to-back victories, it would not be enough, as Yugoslavia and Scotland took the final 2 qualifying berths. There would be no French cock at Italia 90. Despite failure to qualify for the 1990 World Cup, the French Football Federation took the decision to stick with Platini as their coach. The legendary number 10 still had tremendous support from the media and public, coupled with the belief from the Federation that he was still a young and learning coach whose football vision aligns with their future strategy. And this seemed an inspired choice, as in qualification for Euro 92, France won all 8 of their qualifying matches in a group comprising both Czechoslovakia and Spain. Moreover, the style implemented by Platini was extremely pleasing on the eye. With a strike force of Jean-Pierre Papin and Eric Cantona contributing 12 goals and the introduction to now mainstays Didier Deschamps and Laurent Blanc, France went into the 1992 European Championships as one of the teams to beat. With expectation rife amid appearing at their first international tournament in 6 years, France hoped to make a major impact at this tournament. In reality though, a tough group coupled with an inability to handle the pressure saw the French completely flop at the tournament. 2 draws with host Sweden and challengers England and a loss to eventual champions Denmark saw the hopefuls eliminated quickly. The form of Papin and Cantona seen in qualification was less than visible at the tournament, and the coupling of complacency and failure to handle pressure imposed upon them was a dire mix. Platini subsequently took the decision to resign, and the FFF quickly accepted that resignation. In spite of delivering a foundational change off the pitch, results were of greater importance. This would ultimately be the end of Platini's managerial career at the ripe old age of 37, though this would not be the end of his contribution to football, as he later presided over UEFA in an 8-year stint that ended in mass controversy. Following the conclusion of Euro 1992, 2 major decisions were afoot for the French Football Federation. One was in their hands, the other was not. The choice they had to make was who would take over leading the French national team ahead of qualification for the 1994 World Cup. But first, the Executive Committee of FIFA was deciding who should host the 1998 World Cup, France or Morocco. By a result of 12-7, France were awarded the tournament, meaning they would host the 1998 edition 60 years on from first hosting the tournament in 1938. But for now, focus was on the near future qualification for the 1994 World Cup, and France needed a manager. Once again, the FFF sought an internal solution and turned their attention towards Gérard Houllier. He had been the technical director of France since 1988, as well as the assistant to Michel Platini. Once more, he aligned with the federation's approach towards youth development and modernising the French game. Alas, problems with results continued to plague their overall aims of all-round improvement. France were inconsistent in their 1994 World Cup qualifying group, allowing rivals of Sweden and Bulgaria to capitalise on their hiccups. During the closing stages of the group, results were needed in their two home matches against Israel, who sat in last, and Bulgaria, who themselves were pushing for qualification. Houlier's men would go on to lose both matches in the 90th, with the results proving detrimental. France would miss out on qualification to the 1994 World Cup, the second in a row they had missed. For all of their off-field improvements, the investment in youth, the renewal of facilities and practices, France could not deliver results when it counted. Meaning that once again, there would be no French cock at USA 94. For the second time in as many years, the French Football Federation were having to search for a new manager. Deciding this time to be more cautious and considered, Jacquet, Houlier's assistant, was appointed as the provisional manager until the end of the 1994 World Cup to see if any stronger coaches became available. In the meantime though, this gave opportunity to Jacquet to stake his claim as a potential candidate for the job. 4 wins in 4 matches in the first half of 1994, including a 1-0 away win against Italy in Naples, saw him emerge as the leading successor to Gérard Houllier. By July of 2024, the FFF had seen enough. Jacquet was appointed as permanent manager until the end of Euro 96. It was now utterly integral that France began to make progress. They had failed to qualify for 3 of the previous 4 tournaments, and with a home World Cup on the horizon, qualification to the precursor Euros was imperative. Their qualifying group saw them drawn alongside Azerbaijan, Israel, Poland, Romania and Slovakia. A slow start of 3 draws in their opening 3 matches gave cause for concern for French supporters who had seen this show before. However, the goal-scoring form of Yuri Djurkaev and the emergence of a young Zinedine Zidane quelled any fears as France qualified unbeaten in second place. A key component of this success was the remarkable defensive performance, which saw the French only concede 2 goals in their 10 qualifying matches. Any celebration of qualification though was tempered given the immense expectation placed upon France at the Euros 4 years earlier. Le Bleus touched down in Blighty with cautious optimism coursing through their veins. Following Cantona's ban for his assault on a Crystal Palace fan a year earlier, 23-year-old Zinedine Zidane was the man the team was centred around. The likes of Marcel Desailly, Christophe Dugarry, Lilian Thuram and Fabien Barthez had all been brought into the fold more prominently since the arrival of Jacquet. The group they were drawn into had plenty of familiar characters from their recent past. Bulgaria had pipped France to qualification in the 1994 World Cup, Romania pipped them to group winners in qualification for this tournament, and Spain were defeated by Platini and co in qualification for Euro 92. After a dismal group showing 4 years earlier, France were largely comfortable here. 2 victories over Romania and Bulgaria, with a Spain draw sandwiched in between. This led to a clash with the Netherlands at Anfield, which saw the French continue their defensive solidity in a 0-0 draw. On penalties, France prevailed to the semi-finals, scoring all 5 of their spot kicks. The semi-finals though is where they would meet their maker, as the newly formed nation of the Czech Republic overcame the French on penalties in a second successive goalless draw. It was sadly not to be for Jacquet's men, but the progress in both results and youth development appeared to finally be paying dividends. Following Euro 96, the beauty of hosting the World Cup would provide welcome relief for France due to not having the necessity to qualify for the competition. In spite of this though, some resistance towards Jacquet had been forthcoming. Defeats to England, Denmark and Russia between Euro 96 and the 98 World Cup saw fans vocally calling for Jacquet to resign and were unimpressed with what they perceived to be very defensive tactics deployed by their coach. Nevertheless, Jacquet would survive the pressure and be the coach to lead France into their home World Cup and, more crucially still, their first World Cup in 12 years. But before we dive headfirst into the 1998 World Cup, let's pull it back to 1988 just for a second. With the drop-off of performances from France towards the late 80s, the French Football Federation were keen to adopt a broad strategy to address issues with player development and talent creation. The main repercussion of this at the time was the creation of the Clairefontaine National Institute of Football. Alongside the establishment of a national talent identification system, the centre would nurture players from their technical and tactical training to more holistic measures that would aid in the development of mental strength too. France were determined to rival the success of Germany and Italy in Europe and had hopes this would take them forward. Given what we now know, it's clear that this was a successful implementation of strategy, with the likes of Kylian Mbappe coming through at Clairefontaine. But in 1998, ahead of their home World Cup, this was the first time we saw this investment in youth development really bear fruit for the French national team. Thierry Henry was still a largely unknown quantity on the international team when he was called up for the 1998 World Cup by Aimé Jacquet. The Clairefontaine youth products had only scored 4 league goals in the season prior at Monaco, but the management team had clearly seen enough talent at this stage. After missing 2 World Cups in a row, France returned to the FIFA World Cup for the first time in over a decade. Drawn into Group C alongside Denmark, Saudi Arabia and South Africa, it was imperative for the Bleus to show that all the improvements made off the pitch could now translate on the pitch. They opened up the World Cup taking on South Africa in Marseille, where goals from Bordeaux legend Christophe Dugarry and Thierry Henry set them on their way to a 3-0 victory. They went one better against Saudi Arabia, with Henry at the double this time, as well as goals from Lizarazu and 20-year-old David Trezeguet. In the final match over fellow Europeans Denmark, a Yuri Zhirkov penalty and a strike from Emmanuel Petit was enough to make their group record a perfect one, as the knockout stage beckons. The last 16 would see France taking on Paraguay, adding a 4th continent to their list of opponents at the tournament so far. And they weren't to be taken lightly, having shut out Spain in the group stage, which would prove vital in knocking the Iberian nation out. In this one, Paraguay again frustrated the bigger nation, with France unable to find a goal in the 90. However, this was at the time when the golden goal rule was seen as the future, and with its implementation here, when Blanc netted in the 114th minute, it was game over. At the quarter-final stage, a very stern test was imminent, a clash with 1994 World Cup finalists Italy. And they were in fine form too, with Christian Vieri and Roberto Baggio well amongst the goals. In this one, the uber defensive style bemoaned by the French people a year prior came into its own to keep out a dangerous Azzurri side as the match ran all the way through to penalties. In the shootout, the young trio of Zidane, Trezeguet and Henry all dispatched perfectly, as Di Biagio would be the unfortunate soul to send his nation home. The semi-finals would yield the tournament surprise package of Croatia. A nation that had only had independence for a matter of years was taking the globe by storm, with their excellent midfield maestro Robert Prozinecki and their goal-scoring wizard Davor Šuker. And once more here, he opened the scoring in this one to give the hosts a major fright. But they needn't be worried, as they were bowed out by legendary right-back Lilian Thuram, who scored not once but twice to turn this game around, which really was quite something, given it was the only 2 goals he ever scored for France in his 142 caps. It meant that Jacquet's men were heading for the final, their first ever in the FIFA World Cup. Despite failing to qualify in the last 2 iterations, France had shown to the global footballing community that they were now a major force. Could they take that one last step and pick up the crown. Well, if there was ever a nation you don't want to face at a World Cup, it's Brazil. The holders of the 1994 World Cup, with the likes of Cafu, Roberto Carlos, Dunga, Rivaldo and Ronaldo, were the obstacle in the way of France. However, pre-kickoff there was pandemonium when Brazil submitted their team sheet with R9 not in the lineup. There was disbelief everywhere. How could the best player in the world be missing from the biggest match of them all? However, half an hour later, suddenly Ronaldo was in the amended team sheet. It transpired later that he had a convulsive fit in the afternoon before the match, but had chosen to play when he regained consciousness. We'll leave the conspiracy theories on that one to another day. Let's head now for kickoff. With 75,000 in attendance and a global television audience of an estimated 1.7 billion, Brazil vs France was already seen as the biggest World Cup final ever. An end-to-end opening 30 paved the way for the first goal of the match as Zidane latched onto Petit's cross to give the hosts an early lead. He was shortly to double his goal tally with a second head of the match, nodding home a Jacquet corner just moments before the half-time whistle. It gave Brazil a mountain to climb in the second half, which was made slightly easier when Marcel Desailly's lunge on Cafu saw him pick up a second yellow. However, despite numerous rallies from the South Americans, Jacquet was well versed in getting this French side to shut up shop, and it would actually be France who picked up the third and final goal, with Vieira teeing up fellow Arsenal teammate Emmanuel Petit to seal it in a 3-0 win for the hosts. Jubilation ensued. The underperforming, persistent letdowns of France eras gone by had now made way as this perfect French storm took hold. The cautious Aimé Jacquet's defensive resilience, coupled with the youthful exuberance of the likes of Zidane, Trezeguet, Vieira, Henry, that was forged in Clairefontaine still, in front of a backdrop of an outpouring of love from the French people, culminated in Le Bleus picking up their first title. It was the first time that France really seemed to embrace its multi-ethnic makeup with a mix of white players, black players and players from North African descent. Winning on home soil saw unity cross societal divides and fostered a collective identity not yet seen in modern times. Together, the players, the coach, the staff behind the scenes at the federation, the institutions and the fans all worked in harmony to deliver a result that now in hindsight seems obvious. This French team had great players and France is a major footballing nation, but back then this was the result of years upon years of hard work to reach this state. The legacy is there for all to see too. France have gone on to become one of the most feared competitors in the international football scene. Clairefontaine has gone from strength to strength, developing and nurturing young talent in one shared philosophy with outstanding results. Many of that France team would go on to even more success in their playing days, particularly the likes of Thierry Henry, Zinedine Zidane, Patrick Vieira, Lilian Thuram, David Trezeguet, Fabien Barthez and many more. This team that became a beacon of hope for so many French supporters was cultivated by Aimé Jacquet's stupendous man management. It is testament to the man that he chose to retire from coaching just days after this triumph. The mental factor of the position had taken its toll on the man, and he wished to leave the pressures of being the national team boss behind him. It would not be the end of him and France's relationship though, as he stayed on as technical director within the FFF until 2006, where in that time Trezeguet would lead his nation into another triumph at Euro 2000. Looking now at the present day, France has been Europe's strongest competitor over the last decade. They are always there and thereabouts and even picked up their second World Cup in 2018, this time with Deschamps as coach, a man who had been at the beating heart of the 1998 World Cup in his role as holding midfielder. France's road to the 1998 World Cup was long and winding. It took multiple setbacks, obstacles and challenges to overcome, but collectively within they stuck by their plan, their vision, their strategy, and that proved crucial. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not just a story of how France won its World Cup, but a story of how a nation rewrote the entire course of football and history. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you very soon.